Warnick. Let's see. So a little bit of background, and then I'll let him get right to it. As I mentioned, his current roles at CASE, he is also the research director for the department and co-director of the Case Western Reserve Genetic Research Ethics and Law Center. So you can get a sense of what he's going to talk about. His PhD is in bioethics from Case Western, where he joined the faculty and focuses on ethical, legal, and social implications of genetics and genomics in clinical and public health settings. And his research program has been grounded in a number of areas. Of course, since I found him, it's the ethical implications of expanding newborn screening programs, but also, the storage and use of perinatal and pediatric biospecimens and diversity in genetic research. He also leads ethics and legal workshops for Newborn Screening Translational Research Network. And it also notably is a member of the IRB for the NIH All of Us research program. And today he's going to talk with us. His title is Necessary but Not Sufficient: Challenges and Limitations of Addressing Diversity in Precision Medicine Research. So I'll let him take it away, sir, and then he's welcome to answer questions during, so if people want to enter into the chat box, he can see it. Annie is, as always, our astute administrative Zoom expert. So go right ahead, sir.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here from my living room. My internet was acting up a little bit in my office today, so I've moved to a space closer to the router. So hopefully we will have no problems.
It's the ethical flair.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, as you said, it's like a fireside chat. I should have. No, this is a real honor to be talking with all of you today. And, you know, Dr. Trini and I have been doing work in areas of ethical, legal, social issues with newborn screening for well over 10 years now. And it's been a really great collaboration. And I'm really excited to talk with all of you and to share some of the work that we've been thinking about at CASE, but also has been informed by a lot of the work that Beth and I have worked on together over the years. I'm going to share my screen. I have no problem with interruptions. So yeah, I think Annie's going to be monitoring. So if there's a hand that wants to go up, or if you just want to interrupt me, it's no problem at all. I am going to share my screen. Share. Here we go. So my talk is titled Necessary but Not Sufficient: The Challenges and Limitations of Addressing Diversity in Precision Medicine Research. This talk is, I do have a disclosure, which is I'm a member of the All of Us IRB. Those of you who are not aware, the All of Us program is the National Institutes of Health Precision Medicine Initiative's cohort trying to recruit 1 million Americans into a research cohort that will be used for translational science and precision medicine research, hopefully, you know, from now until really indefinitely. I'll be talking a little bit more about the All of Us program as a case study for us to think about diversity. But this presentation does not represent the views of the All of Us program or the IRB or the National Institutes of Health. I'm speaking as my own self, as a scholar in the areas of genetics and diversity. But a lot of what I'm going to talk about has been informed by my participation on the All of Us IRB, and I'm happy to answer any questions about the IRB. Just a little background: the IRB is considered an independent group outside of the All of Us program. So our goal is to look at the human subjects protection needs for the development of a 1 million person cohort. And it's been a really wonderful and challenging experience being on that IRB to try to help to guide the recruitment of 1 million Americans into a national study like this. So what I want to talk about today is to, in some ways, problematize this ongoing issue that many of you probably have been on lots of phone calls and lots of meetings and have heard over and over and over again, which is this issue of a persistent bias in genetic research generally, but really a lot of medical research even more generally, which is the lack of diversity of underrepresented populations, underserved populations within research cohorts and within research studies. The graph on the screen is probably one that you've seen multiple times before. It's from an article that was in Nature News by Alice Popejoy and Malia Fullerton just a few years ago, and has been been pointed to as an important point of development for thinking about diversity in research, showing really how little participation there is of non-European populations in genetic research. She compared a study that was done in 2009 to a study that was done in 2016. And while she did see an increased level of participation from underrepresented populations in genetic research, most of that growth was including Asian populations. And so if you looked at African Americans and Hispanic populations, still very, very low levels of research within the context of genetic research. And this is pretty reflective of other kinds of research generally. These findings have been pointed to for addressing the need for diversity within research. And, you know, there have been multiple letters to editors and articles about unequal representation of underserved populations within genetic studies. There have been issues around prioritizing diversity in genetics research, and concerns about what they're in this article by colleagues actually there in DC. Many of you may know Shaniqua or Charles Rotimi, Shaniqua Collar or Charles Rotimi, talking about the kind of lag in really addressing diversity in genomic research. And again, I'm talking about genomic research here, but really this could apply to lots of other research studies in thinking about, you know, increasing diversity. And for the most part, when these articles have referred to diversity, they are referring to racial and ethnic diversity, although for many studies, that's not the only way to address diversity. There's gender diversity, there's age diversity, there's employment and education diversity. And we'll talk a little bit about how that's been addressed by the All of Us program in just a few minutes. So, you know, we have this interesting paradox going on, which is that underserved communities, especially racial and ethnic minorities, have been largely underrepresented in biomedical research. This trend has continued in biobanks and biorepositories. Some recent studies looking at national and regional biobanks have shown very low participation of African Americans and other racial and ethnic minorities in biobanks generally. But we also have this mantra going on over and over again that for precision medicine to be successful, we need to ensure that there's diversity in our cohorts to adequately represent all populations in research. So this raises this interesting question, which is, for me, is inclusion enough to address issues of equity in biomedical research? We hear over and over and over again the mantra of inclusion, diversity, inclusion, diversity. We got to make sure our cohorts are diverse enough. So every time you put in an NIH grant, you have to fill out your inclusion criteria. You have to fill out those forms. And those forms are incredibly important. The idea of inclusion is incredibly important. But what I would like to do over the next few minutes is kind of problematize this idea of inclusion being the end goal for addressing equity in biomedical research. I want to do so by thinking through a framework that Malia Fullerton at University of Washington and I have been playing around with, which is to think about research as inputs and outputs. And what I mean by inputs are the things that go into making a research project, right? Who are the research subjects? What kind of biospecimens or associated data do you need? What kinds of social and environmental data do you need in order to build a cohort or build a study that will hopefully be able to be used for precision medicine research? Those are all the inputs. How do you get people into a study? How do you do consent appropriately? The other side of that coin are outputs. What happens during the research? How are research questions actually formulated? How do you decide who gets access to biospecimens and data? How do you disseminate research results? And how do you translate those results into innovation that will help public health or clinical practice, right? And so you'll hear me throughout the next couple minutes talk off and on about inputs and outputs. I also I feel very strongly that I don't like giving talks without some data and some voices from the people who we're actually talking about. So throughout this presentation, you're going to see some quotes. And while this isn't a formal data presentation, we did a study a number of years ago called the Cleveland Community Voices Project, which was meant to assess knowledge and beliefs about genetics and health inequalities and genetic research from underserved African American, Latinos, and whites in the greater Cleveland area. It consisted of 12 focus groups and 121 in-depth audio-taped individual interviews. It was a community engaged process. We had 15 community partners working with us on this grant. And while this talk is not specifically about this project, so I'm not going to give a lot of details, you're going to see some quotes that I think will give you some texture and will be some voices from the people who are experiencing health disparities to help to kind of guide us through what I think are the bigger problems in both input and output for genetic research and diversity. So let's start with how do we address the input problem, right? This is the problem that persistent bias has really kind of touched on, which really translates in how do we increase diversity within our research cohorts, given that we see low levels of participation in lots of research studies. So let's start with kind of the bread and butter of problematic participation, which is how do you recruit and consent individuals from underserved populations who may normally not be included in research, or who might be purposely left out of research, or who have felt left out of research. And the first thing that we've noticed in a lot of the work that we've done in communities is this concept of needing locally and culturally appropriate education and consent materials. Just having a one-size-fit-all consent form, just having a one-size-fits-all educational approach doesn't get at what many people within underserved communities feel are putting them in awkward positions, using them as research subjects and not really partners in research. They're not sensitive to potential mistrust of either a government agency or a hospital. So I'm here in Cleveland. We hear a lot from our communities, oh, what is Cleveland Clinic going to do next to us? You know, what are those folks that share our property? What are they going to come in and do to us? Not with us, not for us, but to us. And that may be something similar that some of you have experienced in some of the community and clinical engagement you've done, is this kind of common sense of mistrust and concern about how data and samples are used. And this is a quote from one of our participants that says, I think there's a mistrust, and I think it comes back to, it might not even be a conscious mistrust from the past where there were situations where Black people were used as guinea pigs. This is a pretty salient quote even today, as we're starting to develop and invest large amounts of resources into COVID-19 research, much of which is going to be focusing on maybe some of the disparities. And we've already heard from community groups, at least here in Cleveland, this concept of not wanting to be used for, you know, experimentation of vaccines, or not wanting to be used for other kinds of accelerated clinical research. And I think we have to think really broadly about how to make our outreach and consent processes and recruitment processes for underserved communities build trust and create trustworthiness of the institutions in order to create better relationships between communities and participants and researchers to kind of move forward, you know, increasing the number of underrepresented populations in research. We also need to think about where those where those recruitment and consent processes are taking place. We hear from a lot of our participants that they don't like the idea of only being approached for research at the hospital. They feel like they're maybe not getting the same kind of care, or they're not, that clinicians or researchers are not respecting their spaces or giving them time to think within their communities about participation. So a lot of our participants wanted more accessible recruitment sites. So the idea of recruiting at community hospitals, places of worship, local businesses, community centers. This is a quote from someone who said, "This is the most I've ever talked about genetic research because it didn't apply to me. Why? Because I have no money. They never asked me, and I'm not sure that nobody would ask me because it didn't matter if you didn't have nothing to contribute to this research. There was this constant sense from our participants that they felt like, why would anyone want us to participate in research where just we don't have anything to really contribute? So there's this interesting, if you think about this quote and the quote from the slide before, there's this interesting dichotomy that's been happening in our work that's come out in a number of our other work. Yeah, go. Homeschooling and working all at the same time. Where there was a sense where our community members didn't want to be used, but they also didn't want to be left behind. And that's been a really meaningful development. And again, not that surprising, I would say, but important nonetheless to kind of think about this idea, this dual idea of, on one hand, not wanting to be used, and on the other hand, again, wanting to be included, not wanting to be left behind. And that's really kind of come up continuously. So, that brings us to the All of Us research program. I'm sure maybe some of you have seen these websites or are maybe even part of recruitment processes for the All of Us program. This was a program that was started by President Obama a few years ago as the Precision Medicine Initiative. It quickly evolved over the last few years into the All of Us research program with the goal of creating a diverse cohort of 1 million Americans that would include biological samples. It would include Fitbit information. So you'd have your Fitbit would be connected to your file and download your sleep habits and your exercise habits. It would be complete data dumps of your health records. So they would have all health records involved as part of the database, as well as the opportunity to do surveys and ask you health-related questions, mental health-related questions, to create really the most robust national database that's ever really been created here in the US for precision medicine research. But one of the main goals was to really reach out and create a cohort that is more representative and more inclusive of Americans generally, right? And of the diversity of Americans, right? So this was from the original, this quote is from the original cohort proposal, which says the PMI cohort, which is now known as the All of Us Research Program, is intended to reflect the diversity of the US, and thus the NIH should ensure that all who want to participate in the cohort will have the opportunity to do so. Without broad inclusion, the PMI cohort program, the All of Us program, will not fulfill its most important goal to increase the health of all Americans, right? So right from the beginning, this was the goal, to create a diverse cohort to make sure that everyone could participate. There are over 100 recruitment sites for the All of Us program all over the country. But even for people who live in areas that do not have a recruitment site directly within driving distance, there is a direct volunteer program where someone can just go online, sign up for the All of Us program, do the consent process online, and then they would get assigned to going and giving blood at a local Walgreens or a local Quest Diagnostics Center. So the idea has been to make sure that anyone who wants to participate can participate in research. Now, there are lots of questions about how that might potentially bias the sample with people who are more likely to participate in research and have access to internet, have access to computers. And that is a concern that the All of Us program has been thinking about. So where are we in this? And I don't know why it's saying just 345 All of Us participants. There are actually 345,000 All of Us participants. And so we have about a little over a third of the 1 million people within the cohort now recruited into the All of Us program. And interestingly, to get back to our issues of diversity, of the 345,000 US participants in the program, 80% of those are participants from what we would consider underrepresented groups in medical research. Right, so this is not just racial and ethnic minorities. This includes racial and ethnic minorities. It includes gender diversity. It includes education and income diversity. It includes age diversity. We know that older Americans are less likely to participate in research, so they've focused on older Americans too. It will eventually focus in on children. I know that's something that all of you may be interested in. Right now, they are not recruiting children, There's a lot of concerns to do it right after some of the concerns around the National Children's Study and other studies. So the hope will be that within the next year, they will launch the pediatric arm of the All of Us program, but right now they're not including. So the 80% includes, I think there are 10 or 11 categories of underrepresented in medical research groups. 80% of the cohort currently represents at least one of those underrepresented categories. And 50% of the cohort, so 50% of that 345,000 participants have identified themselves as either from a racial and ethnic minority group or multiracial. Here is the current racial breakdown of that 350 or so thousand individuals. You can see that 45% have identified as white, 2.9% Asian, 22.4% African American, 17% Hispanic or Latino, 6.4% have identified themselves as more than one race, and then you have 0.7% of the cohort, which is actually a pretty significant number, have preferred not to say. Which again, I'm not saying I don't think it's too surprising, but this data is public. If you go to researchallofus.org, there are a number of data snapshots you can look at. You can also play with the data now. While it's not fully open for researchers yet, you can go on and you can play with data and kind of take a look at what the racial and ethnic makeup is on. One group that you'll notice is absent from this group are Native Americans and Pacific Islanders. That has been specifically left out. There are a number of Native American participants, but the All of Us program is currently doing consultations with a number of tribal organizations, and those tribal organizations and the program have made a decision to not display those data until more agreements and more dialogue happens between communities. And so that is an interesting conversation about what the right thing to do is in that situation. But I just wanted to make sure that that's why those numbers are not present in this data. So here's the question. Does that mean that the input problem has solved? I put up a little caution here. I think that the program is doing really, really well with relationship to kind of the input issue, diversity. And I've been, in fact, both as a bioethicist, as a researcher, and as a member of the IRB, I've been really impressed by how well they've done outreach within underserved communities and how well this cohort has been built to be very different than a lot of other cohorts. And I think that that's really, really wonderful. I've been very impressed, and maybe in the Q&A section, we can talk a little bit about what that means and do we think this is, as representative as it needs to be. They've specifically overrepresented certain populations, so it's not meant to just be representative of the general population numbers. It's actually meant to be overrepresentative. But I also think we need to ask questions about what that diversity means. Are we adequately representing income diversity? Are we adequately representing education diversity? And I think that they're doing a fairly good job, but we need to really be critical, I think, and think broadly about what diversity really means in these settings. But for me, and really the take-home message of my whole talk is that I don't think that that's enough, right? I don't think that even if you were to have the most diverse cohort you could imagine, that you're really going to truly do what the All of Us program is meant to do, which is to, as you can see here, leverage America's rich diversity in order to reduce disparities and move towards health equity, right? And this is right from that original PMI working group report, which says they want to, use the All of Us program to try to look at individual variation, look at community variation, to advance research that's going to ultimately reduce disparities and increase health equity. But for me, I want more of how you're going to get from point A to point B. And let me reiterate that this in no way is implying that the program's not thinking about these issues. They are very deeply. But what I want to do is, over and over again, we hear diversity as the watchword of addressing these issues. And what I want to say in this presentation is that is only step one. That is as I said in my title, that is a necessary but not sufficient part of addressing and reducing health disparities. right? So what I would like to spend the rest of the time talking about is how do we address output issues, right? How do we make sure that precision medicine is actually aimed at reducing disparities and moving us towards health equity? How do you take that nice, diverse cohort and make sure that we're actually addressing the needs of underserved communities, not just inclusion? So one has to do with managing access to data, right? So how might underserved communities and individual participants actually play a role in shaping how precision medicine is done? Is there a possibility of local and community input into research questions? How do you create situations that are not just educating to communities, but actually engaging communities in talking about research goals for all of us? Every site for the All of Us program, for example, has some kind of community advisory board that may be made up of community members or donors. Let's try to find ways for them not only to help recruit and not only to help identify where we can be doing better education about all of us, but let's figure out better ways so that there can be contributions to the science in meaningful ways, truly meaningful ways. This is one of my favorite quotes from our study. This is someone who says, "I wouldn't participate in research because my level of participation in a study is at its lowest level. I don't get to make any decisions. I'm not in on the planning. I'm just the guinea pig." Over and over again, we see this within community settings where people come in, sometimes it's called helicopter research, sometimes it's called parachute research. People come in, they invite us to participate, we participate, and then they leave and we never hear anything about it. We're not part of it. And so one of the questions for me is to increase the goals of output, right? We need to be thinking really meaningfully about how we get participants involved in decision-making at the highest levels of prioritizing research questions. That doesn't mean that community should drive the questions altogether, but it has to be a partnership. We've got to really rethink the way that we do that. Data sharing, right? So one of the big things around these cohorts is this idea of sharing data across various databases, sharing data across multiple cohorts. But, so the All of Us research program, for example, the data gets sent to Vanderbilt University, the samples are sent to Mayo Clinic. And so those research resources are actually leaving local contexts. And right, so one of the things that we've heard is this idea of, maybe not involving local expertise or engagement, because once those data and samples are collected, they leave. They're out in the ether. They're out in the public. So thinking about more local control, or maybe finding ways to increase local control. And then there's also this idea of the danger of losing locally focused research questions. So if I'm collecting samples from Chicago, but all those samples are going to a national database, how do I know that the concerns of Chicagoans, especially underserved Chicagoans, are going to be addressed, right? And so we heard this a little from our participants who kind of said, well, when people take our samples and data, how do we know that they're actually dealing with the stuff that we're dealing with, right? So this person says, in our area, there's so many chemicals that people are exposed to just because of the traffic, the industries that are putting out chemicals in the environment. We have all these factories over here. They were talking about a particular area of Cleveland, and they're putting all these chemicals in the environment. And this participant was really worried that we were going to take their data and never address the issues that they were concerned about, right? And so that's continually a concern among underserved populations and their decisions about participating in research. Translation of results. This is a huge one. How do we guarantee that the results from precision medicine will ultimately benefit underserved communities, right? They contribute samples, they contribute data, they're part of the All of Us cohort. How do we know that the precision medicine research that will actually be conducted on these samples and data will ultimately help these communities? There have been a number of studies that have shown that there's a decreased willingness to participate in research within underserved communities if there's a fear that their communities won't benefit from that research. And here's a quote from one of my participants who said, "Whatever you're doing the research on, is there a guarantee that the outcome will work in the Black community?" And so we need to think of mechanisms that will help to address and try to integrate the concern, not just the concerns about research, but to make sure that there is a goal that the translation of data and research will actually come back to the communities who are giving the samples and the data to studies. One of the questions that comes up a lot is this idea of gene-environment interactions, right? How will we make sure that genomic and biospecimen data ultimately is integrated with social and environmental exposures? This is a big issue for the All of Us program, is they're collecting both. They're collecting medical records, they're collecting genetic samples, they're collecting social and environmental data. And a lot of our communities want to say, well, I'm glad you're collecting my biospecimen, but I don't really believe that a lot of what we're experiencing is due to genetic factors, right? This person says, I can see that there are definite genetic links, like something like sickle cell, but it seems like there are more issues that are linked to maybe economic status. It's cultural. How have things that they've grown up with and the kinds of foods that they've been eating might make them more susceptible than their genetic factors. So again, one of the things that I really value and one of the things I really like about the All of Us program is it's really going to try to be as open source as possible, really allowing all researchers, community scientists to have access to the data. And that's, I think, a really good thing. On the other hand, how do we make sure that all the research that's done with these samples aren't just genetic studies or aren't just studies looking for biological mechanisms? Is there a way to work on prioritizing research that integrates social determinants of health into those genetic studies so that we're not just looking at one side of the kind of the multiple determinants of health coin? And I think that's also going to be really important down the road to hear from underserved and underrepresented populations about their concerns or about their perspectives on including social determinants of health in the larger studies that we're talking about. So where does this leave us? And I think this is really about needing to refocus our kind of social and ethical lenses, right? So if precision medicine has a goal of improving health for everyone, it's going to be essential that the goals for recruiting diverse populations don't end with that inclusion, right? We need to think about including underserved populations into the development of research questions, into communications for the translations of those benefits. We need to find ways to avoid exacerbating health disparities or increasing marginalization within communities, even when we have a diverse sample. Because what I worry about is that once we have our diverse sample, these other things are going to be forgotten about or put on the side. Well, we have a diverse sample, so we've taken care of it. And so I really want us to kind of think broadly about moving us, not just from thinking about input, but to thinking broadly about output as well. In my last few minutes, I just want to talk briefly, and I know this is an issue of concern for maybe many of you on the call, especially because rare diseases are so important in pediatric research and issues around children's health. We're also seeing a different kind of underrepresentation in large cohorts. And I think it's important to not forget about underrepresentation of rare diseases to make sure that we're thinking about the implications of rare disease for precision medicine as well. This is just one of my favorite quotes about rare disease. It's people credit rapid next generation sequencing for the increased pace of medical discovery, but patients and their families, especially those with rare undiagnosed conditions, they are emerging as true engines of precision medicine, racing against the clock to save their children. Parents are building data banks, connecting scientific dots, and fueling therapeutic advances that could otherwise take a decade or more to happen. These parents are increasingly impatient with institution review board restrictions or sharing patient data across institutions or linking biological samples with clinical data, impatient with research protocols that don't give back their children's data. So there's clearly a concern among individuals and families with kids with rare conditions, and the hope that precision medicine will address issues within rare disease. And, I think this is in some ways both an input and an output problem, right? We know that there's been historical output issues, lack of funding for research in pharma for rare diseases, slower translation of research from clinical to clinical practice. That's getting better, I think, not just because of the Orphan Drug Act, it's just because I think there's a higher level of interest, partially financially motivated, from pharmaceutical companies to think about rare disease. So we see this in spinal muscular atrophy and drugs and gene protocols, gene therapy protocols that are very expensive, but hopefully are making a dent in some rare diseases. So I think, we have solved some of the output problems. I think it's getting better. I don't think we're anywhere near where we need to be in terms of promoting research within rare diseases. But we still have an input problem. So this is in some ways going back the opposite direction, which is that if we have a cohort of 1 million Americans, that's fantastic for heart disease, cancers, diabetes, those kinds of things. It's still going to remain a problem for rare disease. Even within 1 million Americans, you're going to have small n's. You're going to have geographic distance between patients. You're going to have smaller representation in these national cohorts. And, it's increasingly difficult to understand natural history of some of these rare diseases if you're only focusing on national cohorts that are never going to be able to represent rare diseases sufficiently. There are some proposals to link the All of Us program with smaller databases of rare diseases. But I do think that we have this larger input problem. And I just want to show some quotes from the All of Us programs websites that kind of show this, debate or kind of clash between the hope that precision medicine will address rare disease and at the same time, the kind of difficulty in doing so in a cohort, right? So here's some quotes from an online analysis of the All of Us program. And I just have a couple more slides, and then we'll open it up for questions. Here's one that says, by enrolling 1 million more volunteers, the All of Us research program will have the scale and the scope to enable research on a wide range of diseases, both common and rare. The second quote, this is from someone who was working with the All of Us program. So personally, I'm motivated to support precision medicine because my son has one of the rarest diseases in the world. And to me, precision medicine and the Precision Medicine Initiative means a shift in the way we're conducting research and the way we can deliver medical care so that no disease and no patient is too rare to be left behind, which I think is really good. And that kind of shows the hope for precision medicine for rare disease. And on the other hand, though, if you look at some of the other things on the website, you see things like this. I'm interested in rare disease. Can I submit it for a case for use? This is from a researcher. Yes, the All of Us research program will consider it. However, the research program is not designed to enable research on all types of rare diseases because they are uncommon in the general population. The All of Us program will enroll relatively small numbers of people with rare conditions. And then the next quote says, the working group acknowledges that the proposed accrual methodology that would lead to a number of very rare diseases that would not be represented in adequate numbers to allow for a robust study. So, what I want to problematize here is just the idea that while the hope for the All of Us program and for other very large research cohorts is to be able to address rare disease, but I worry about the ability to do that given small numbers unless you're linking with more local precision medicine projects that are aimed at rare diseases or aimed at diseases. And there are lots of them around the country. There may be a number of them there. And I think we're gonna have to do a better job of linking existing precision medicine projects with these larger databases. I also think that we have the danger of creating a new kind of underrepresentation, right? So as we get into precision medicine and as we start stratifying populations by genetic and other kinds of differences, we are inevitably going to create new kinds of what I'm calling orphan genotypes, and that we've heard this term elsewhere. This idea that, yeah, I have a common chronic disease, but I have a very rare genotype that now puts me in a new rare situation. This has been happening in cancer research for a long time and other kinds of research as well. This isn't a new problem. But I think it raises this question, which is, are we redefining disparities through genetic variation? Are we going to create new kinds of stigmatization or new kinds of discrimination? And so are we kind of reifying or reiterating a new form of underrepresentation that we need to then deal with beyond the ones that we're already struggling for? So I don't mean to end on a downer note, but I want to make sure that we're thinking broadly and critically about how precision medicine may raise new areas of underrepresentation and underserved. I'm going to stop there and open it up for questions. I want to thank my collaborators on this and really thank all of you for being on this today in this new world of online presentations.
I have a quick question while we wait for others. And you might have mentioned this and I missed it. And I don't mean to get political, but the diversity of age in the cohort. You and I have had discussions about the All of Us program and its approach to children and what they've done and what they're going to do about it moving forward, the progress they've made, the challenges that they're wrestling with.
Yeah, no, this is a huge issue, and in fact, it was such a issue that they kind of put the pediatric cohort on hold. Not on hold like we're not going to get to it, but on hold as they develop those processes more robustly. One of the big issues, for example, was whether or not to start with younger children or older children. Originally one of the ideas was to start with younger children, especially newborns, because then consent would have been clearer or more straightforward because parents would just give consent for participation. And that as you get older, you have to start moving into areas of assent and co-decision making. And so one of the ideas was to start with younger children and then develop assent processes along the way. But as you and I and maybe other people on the call know, to think that recruiting newborns into research is an uncontroversial issue, it would be an understatement. And so I think they're still kind of thinking about how they might roll out the pediatric arm. One of the other issues is whether or not parents have to be participants if they want to enroll their children. Originally, one of the ideas was no, that parents could just enroll their children and not be participants themselves. And that raises all sorts of questions about consent for return of results. One of the things that's a watchword of the All of Us program is return of value, giving data and information back to participants. And one of the concerns is if I'm giving genetic information about a child back to parents, that's not only telling them something about their children, it's of course telling them something about themselves, and they haven't consented to anything. They haven't been part of the project. And this is not new. This has been an issue in genetic research, for a long time with children. And so they're also kind of thinking about, well, how might we enroll children in a way that partially enrolls a parent or, requires some kind of consent or permission. So I think there's an eagerness, I've heard an eagerness within the pediatric community for getting this rolling, right? That we're already a year and a half in. You already have almost 400,000 people enrolled. We need to be getting children in, and I think there's a balance here of getting it going, getting children into the study, and at the same time being careful about how to do so that we're not repeating some of the mistakes of the past.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Dr. Woodford has a question. She just had her hand up. That was excellent feedback. Thank you.
So, Aaron, this was just great. I mean, really thoughtful and informative, and I even found it very provocative because all of me got promoted as this is going to be our effort to have as you pointed out, as a national cohort of individuals that represent all ages, so the whole lifespan and all of our incredibly wonderful diversity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you really, I thought, picked up on a point that for us as pediatricians is important to think about. I mean, so if we think about what the definition is of rare disease, right? It has a population-based definition. And if you have 1 million people and you have a disease that occurs 1 in 100,000, you may have 10 children, right? And so I think that it will be important as we roll this out to be really thinking about intentional ways where we can leverage the firepower of all of me to meet these populations that will be underrepresented because they have rare disease. So connections, for example, with NORD, connections with disease foundations, single gene disorder foundations. And I think that for us as pediatric or as child health investigators opens up the possibility of thinking about a rationale for some of our take on research, because the All of Me initiative isn't going to be able to cover this by itself. And so what you want to do is to actually have an alliance, a partnership, a long way to go to maybe make a point, but then to also ask, are there plans to make these connections with with disease foundations? Are there plans to be thinking about ancillary studies that could address this particular group of underrepresented folks in this database?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question, and it's a really important one. And I would say that one of the reasons why there has been, by no means is there a delay, but one of the reasons why I think the All of Us program has been cautious in just kind of opening up research is to try to secure some of those relationships. I think there can be more. But I think there has been some really meaningful conversations that I have witnessed through my work on the IRB in trying to build those relationships. Many of the folks who have been leading the All of Us cohort program are individuals with rare conditions. And so many of the people that have been brought on to work on the regulatory and the governance processes, I think are very cognizant of exactly the issue you're raising. Will the All of Us cohort in and of itself be able to address all those issues? Probably not. I think they're hoping that some of the research that will come out of this will be generalizable to lots of different diseases. But I think they have recognized the need to partner with groups like NORD and Genetic Alliance and other groups because of the need to just acknowledge the limitations of what a cohort like this can have. I think what I would love to see more of is that kind of translational decision-making processes, right? So how will research be prioritized? How will researchers who may be in institutions who have less funding or who have less resources be able to utilize these resources? But I think you're right. I think ultimately it's going to be these smaller precision medicine programs that are going to have to either link up or have to promote their own work in order to deal with a lot of these pediatric conditions, right? So I know just because of the work that I've been doing, the Lori Children's has 2 or 3 different smaller precision medicine projects on things like pediatric leukemia, other kinds of disorders. Michigan State has a number. I'm sure maybe you all have as well. And what we're going to have to do is find better ways to link those together in order to promote, the goals of precision medicine on a wider basis, especially as we start enrolling kids. And I think the program is trying really hard to do that sufficiently. I think it's hard. It's a really hard thing to do.
So I think one final point, since you sit in kind of a catbird seat here, is to sort of try to figure out how we could set this up as a win-win. And that is to say to these more targeted groups, join us because you will then have access to our analytic firepower. And whether it's gene by environment interactions and the very cool study designs that are coming forward, or, I mean, I don't think they'll need help with biobanking because, as you point out, these people are highly, highly motivated. But there has to be something that you continuously envision this as a whole that's more than the sum of the component parts in a federated kind of way.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I like to use the word federated. I think that's right? Trying to think about governance that can then allow for the tools and the resources of, a multi-billion-dollar project to help support, these other, not even call them ancillary, these other sister projects that are going to be needed. And I think, there are a lot of challenges, well, especially now because the program's kind of shut down in-person recruitment. But I think there's a lot of challenges trying to get up to that million. But it's been fairly successful, and I think once the research hub opens, there will be a big push to try to address some of these exact issues, right?
There's a question from Dr. Lubin about asking if there's a plan to link with national programs already collecting GWAS and enormous biobanks, for example, Children's Oncology Group.
Yes, not that I know of directly yet. I think at the beginning of the program, there was a debate among, and this was before I joined this is before I joined the IRB. There was talk about whether or not to create the All of Us program by linking existing cohorts or by creating a new cohort. And it was ultimately decided to create a new cohort in order to systematize the program, to make sure that the same data was collected across every participant. But now that is moving, I have heard that there have been talks about how they might be able to link up with other data sources. So there's nothing formal that I know of yet, but I know that now that the program is working well and collecting data, there's been a re-push, I guess, to try to say, should we also be thinking about existing GWAS studies, existing population-based research? But I don't know of anything specifically that's happening. Any other questions? I mean, I have to say, being on the IRB has, before I joined the IRB, I was pretty worried about the All of Us program, pretty critical about the All of Us program. And I have to say that while joining it gave me a lot of insight into the program, and really, while I'm still concerned about issues within the program, I still have worries about how the data will be used, about representation. My initial kind of overall concerns have really changed over the last couple of years. The program has really, really dedicated, meaningful people working for it. They really want to see this succeed. I think, one of the things that we worry about on the IRB that lots of people worry about is overpromising, right? So overpromising what this database could actually accomplish. And the program listens to the IRB, and they really do try to think about those issues. I still worry about overpromising. I still worry that we're saying to communities that, oh, participate in this because it's going to benefit everyone. And I hope that it will. But I really have appreciated, being part of the program and kind of seeing it from a little bit of the inside. We're independent. My concerns are much more around how is this data going to be used? How are we going to, kind of promote, reducing health disparities? This data, can it even do that? And I think it's a concern from the program too. It would be, there's by no means are they thinking that this is going to be a one-size-fits-all project and it's going to solve everybody's problems. But I think we have to spend a lot more time worrying about what happens to these data moving forward in order to assure that that the program actually does promote health for all populations. And I do really worry about that. Are there other comments or thoughts? I'd love to hear more feedback or more thoughts about this.
Well, I've been getting good side feedback on the chat about that this was very, very enjoyable and very interesting. Risk benefit, Dr. Lubin says, a real key to any realistic outcome.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So is there a plan to link the national programs? Oh, that was
what we talked about, yeah. Yep. Well, then I'll draw us to a close and let others get on to their 1 o'clock meetings. This was wonderful, as I anticipated. Dr. Goldenberg is always an extraordinarily engaging and thought-provoking speaker. And so this was exactly what I'd hoped for, and everyone seems to have thoroughly enjoyed it. If anyone has any other questions or follow-up they want to direct, Annie and I can connected with Dr. Goldenberg, or you can Google him because he's very
Yeah,
busy.
I'm happy to answer any questions, or if people want to get involved, or if they want to talk more about this research. Malia Fullerton and I and others are starting to work on a couple more projects to address some of these issues. And so, would love to think about collaborations and maybe come back and, give an update on how the program's going in a year or so.
That would be awesome. Well, thank you, Sarah. Allow you to get back to your part-time schooling.
Thank you all so much for inviting me. This was really wonderful.
Thank you for everyone. And next week, just before everyone goes, next week, there will not be a Monday seminar. There will be a Thursday noon seminar. It will be Dr. Lisa Simpson, the head of Academy Health, the National Health Services Research Organization. She's quite a prominent and engaging speaker. This is part of the Research Week speaker set, and we'll send an email update to remind you, but just to remember, next Monday we won't be at this time. We will the following Monday. So thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thank you again. Love it.
Thanks, Aaron.
Bye, everybody.